The void screamed. Space itself tore apart, folding in on its own reflection. A storm unlike any seen by mortal eyes raged between galaxies, a whirlpool of violet fire and blinding silver light. Within it, echoes of countless voices cried out, some pleading, some roaring, all swallowed by the silence of eternity. And through that storm, something living fell, a streak of black and silver tumbling through the chaos, wrapped in ribbons of lightning and fragments of memory. His body burned with the heat of re-entry, but his soul burned hotter. He hit the void hard, not with the weight of a man, but with the presence of a king. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. T'Challa, son of T'Chaka, king of Wakanda, protector of the living and the dead, fell from the stars. His eyes snapped open, glowing faintly through his broken mask. The world around him was unrecognizable. The constellations were wrong. The hum of vibranium in his veins was gone. His suit flickered with dying power. He tried to stand. Gravity dragged him down, heavy and unfamiliar. The ground beneath him was not earth but metal, ancient, cold, and dead. A sky of rusted red stretched above, filled with storm clouds that bled lightning. A faint tremor rippled through the soil. Then another. He looked up. There was no sun. Only a storm of shadow and light twisting endlessly in the heavens. The same wound in space that had torn him from home. For a heartbeat, he thought of Wakanda, of Shuri's laughter, of his mother's voice, of the ancestors waiting beyond the veil. Then the storm thundered again. Something had noticed him. He took a breath, slow and steady, his heart sinking to the silent rhythm of the land. His claws extended with a whisper. The habit was instinct, the stance, memory. "I am not lost," he murmured to the wind. "I am where I must be." Lightning cracked. In the distance, green eyes flickered in the dark, a machine awakening, ancient and patient. T'Challa narrowed his gaze, the storm reflecting in his eyes. Then let them come. He stood tall amid the rain of fire and ruin, a king unbroken, a shadow in a dying world. The storm raged on, but the man within it had found his footing. The king had arrived, and somewhere beyond the clouds, the galaxy turned to watch. The air was heavy, thick with iron, ash, and memory. When T'Challa's eyes opened again, the storm above had quieted, but the silence it left behind was worse than thunder. He rose slowly from the crater his fall had carved, his suit hissing faintly, damaged and cracked. The purple glow of Wakandan energy sputtered and died across his armor plates, leaving only dull black metal and scorched fabric. He pressed a hand to his chest plate. Nothing. The heartbeat of vibranium, that soft pulse that had always connected him to home, to the soul of his people. It was gone. The silence beneath his palm felt endless. He turned slowly, scanning the horizon. The landscape stretched forever, barren and jagged. The ground was made of metallic sand that shimmered in dull reds under the dying light of twin moons. Mountains of corroded steel and broken stone towered like the ribs of long-dead gods. Everywhere there were remnants of war, shattered armor, buried machines, the ghosts of 1,000 battles fought by hands not his own. He crouched and ran his fingers through the dust. It felt strange, gritty, magnetic, humming faintly with residual energy. Not life, just power left behind. "Not Wakanda," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the empty wind. "Not even Earth." His senses sharpened. No birds, no scent of water, no heartbeats, only the metallic wind and the faint vibration of something deep beneath the surface, something mechanical and ancient. He looked to the sky again. The storm that had brought him here still churned in the upper atmosphere, a wound that refused to heal. Beyond it, stars gleamed unfamiliar and cruel. He did not recognize a single constellation. The realization hit like a blade. He was alone, entirely. He clenched his fists, feeling the absence of the kinetic hum that had always flowed through his suit. His mind flickered through memories. Shuri's smile, the council's voices, the laughter of his people, the heart-shaped herb burning like fire in his blood. Now there was only the echo of those things. He spoke softly, almost in prayer. "Bast, if you can hear me, guide my steps. If not, then I will find my own way." The wind shifted. Far off, a new scent reached him. Ozone, oil, and something older than both. A hum rose from beneath the surface, steady, rhythmic, like the first beats of a machine heart waking from slumber. T'Challa's eyes narrowed. His instincts whispered, this world was not dead, it was waiting. He stood taller, scanning the horizon once more, his mind cleared, his heart steadying. If there was no vibranium here, he would build something stronger, from courage, from intellect, from will. Because a king does not rule only the soil of his birth. He rules wherever his feet stand and wherever his people might one day need him. And so, in the silence of a dying planet, the Black Panther took his first step forward, alone, but never defeated. The silence of the world pressed in like a weight, heavy and unrelenting. When the wind shifted, it carried with it a sound that was not sound at all, a vibration that trembled in his bones, half memory, half dream. T'Challa closed his eyes. Darkness folded around him, warm and familiar. In that void, he saw them. The golden plains of Wakanda shimmered beneath twin suns that were never meant to share the same sky. The air smelled of heart-shaped herbs and river clay. Drums echoed in rhythm with the pulse of his heart. For a fleeting moment, home seemed near enough to touch. Shuri's laughter rippled through the dream, soft and bright. Her hands reached toward him, oil-stained and trembling from her workbench. "My king," she whispered, her voice breaking through the static of memory. "You promised you'd come back." Her image flickered, melting into the shimmer of ancestral light. Figures appeared, his father, T'Chaka, standing proud in a field of stars, the panther goddess Bast at his side. Their eyes burned with quiet knowing, with love that crossed the veil. "My son." The old king's voice drifted through the haze. "Your throne follows you wherever you walk. Do not forget who you are." The air began to crackle. The vision shuddered. The gold light dimmed into ash. One by one the voices faded, drawn away by something greater, an alien storm howling at the edge of consciousness. The ancestral plane fractured. The warmth of Wakanda turned cold. The scent of soil and herbs became metal and smoke. The king's heart clenched, caught between two worlds, the one that birthed him and the one that sought to consume him. When his eyes opened again, the red sky of Ngarath loomed overhead. Lightning tore across the horizon, painting the steel wasteland in brief flashes of white. His breath was slow, measured, but the ache in his chest refused to quiet. For a time, he stood motionless. Not a warrior, not a king, just a man listening to ghosts. But the thunder grew louder, drowning even memory. The ground began to tremble beneath his feet. Something vast stirred below, its rhythm cold and mechanical. The vision was gone. Wakanda had faded into the storm, and in its place came a new sound, one that spoke not of home, but of awakening. He lifted his head toward the horizon where the clouds churned like boiling iron. Whatever was coming, it would not wait for grief. And so, with the last echo of his father's voice fading into the wind, the Black Panther turned toward the thunder. The trembling beneath the earth deepened until it became a rhythm, steady, deliberate, alive. The air grew colder, thin as dust, carrying a metallic scent that stung the back of his throat. Each vibration rose through his feet and into his chest, echoing like a distant heartbeat, though no living creature could have made it. The horizon began to shift. Mountains that had seemed dead moments ago began to glow along their edges, veins of pale green light crawling across their surfaces like cracks in glass. The ground split, slow and precise, revealing chambers of smooth black metal beneath. From that darkness, figures emerged. They were tall and thin, skeletal and silent. Their movements were unnatural, too fluid to be mechanical, too measured to be alive. Their eyes burned with green flame, casting long shadows across the iron plain. T'Challa stood still, his breathing shallow. His senses stretched outward, reading the rhythm of their approach. No heartbeats, no warmth, no scent of blood. Only the hum of power flowing through the cold air. He had seen machines before, sentinels, drones, suits of metal guided by human hands. But these were different. These were not built, they were reborn. The nearest of them stopped a few paces away, its skull-like face tilted slightly, studying him. Light ran through its chest in pulses, each one slower than the last. When it spoke, its voice was a vibration, hollow and ancient. Organic anomaly detected, unknown pattern of energy, possible contamination. T'Challa said nothing. His claws slid quietly from their housings, though the sound seemed too small for a world this vast. Another figure stepped forward, larger than the rest, its body marked with golden glyphs that shimmered faintly, its gaze fixed on him as if recognizing something it could not explain. "Identify origin," it demanded, though the words were less language and more resonance. A thought pressed directly into his mind. He straightened slowly, meeting its gaze without fear. His voice, when it came, was calm and low. "I am T'Challa, son of T'Chaka, king of Wakanda. I came through the storm." The machines did not respond. For a moment, even the wind seemed to pause. Then the leader raised a hand, and the green glow intensified. Beams of light formed in their arms, weapons humming with energy drawn from another age. The first shot struck the ground beside him, sending shards of molten dust into the air. The second came closer. T'Challa moved. He leapt sideways, the world slowing around him. His suit, though damaged, still answered his will. The kinetic lines across his armor flickered to life, dim but defiant. His claws slashed across one of the creature's chests, tearing through its metal ribcage. It fell without sound. Another lunged forward. He turned with it, fluid as shadow, and drove his heel into its face. Metal cracked. The green light in its eyes went out. The others hesitated, not out of fear, but in calculation. They were learning him, measuring his every strike. T'Challa's stance shifted. He could feel the dust settle around his feet, the static of their power pressing against his skin. He understood then this was not random violence. This was an awakening, triggered by his presence. The leader stepped forward once more, and its voice broke through the silence like grinding stone. "You do not belong in this age." He tilted his head, breathing slow, his voice a whisper carried by the wind. I have heard that before. The storm above growled, rolling in reply. And as green fire met black lightning, the war for survival began anew. When the last echo of metal against stone faded, the wind returned, slow, heavy, filled with ash. T'Challa stood alone amid the wreckage, surrounded by the broken shells of the things that had tried to unmake him. Their green light dimmed one by one, sinking back into the cracked ground like dying stars. The battle had cost him more than he wished to admit. His suit hung in tatters, its energy reserves drained to a faint, unstable hum. Every movement sent sparks flickering through the fractured circuitry that lined his arms and chest. The kinetic lattice, once the beating heart of his armor, now sputtered like a dying flame. He moved with deliberate calm, kneeling beside one of the fallen machines. Its metal was smooth as obsidian, humming faintly with residual power. The glyphs carved across its surface pulsed like veins. He touched them gently, and the energy bit at his fingertips, a living current, alien and cold. He studied the creature's arm, tracing the flow of power through its frame. He had no lab, no shuri, no tools, but intellect had always been his truest weapon. He tore a sliver of alloy from the corpse, bending it until it snapped with a dull metallic cry. Beneath the outer shell, circuits gleamed like liquid emerald. "So, this is your heart," he murmured. With patience born of genius and desperation, he began to work. He used the claws of his suit as cutting instruments, peeling away layers of dead machinery. Every strike of his hand was measured, every spark catalogued. The hours stretched unnoticed. The red sun dimmed, giving way to a twilight thick with iron dust. By the time he stood again, his armor looked different. The smooth vibranium weave was gone, replaced by plates of blackened Necron alloy fused into the fabric. The suit no longer sang with the familiar rhythm of home, but it moved with him, whispering like shadow. When he flexed his hand, faint green light traced the edges of his claws. The foreign energy did not obey him, it tolerated him. For now that was enough. He looked down at himself, half Wakandan, half something else entirely. For the first time since arriving, he felt the weight of his situation, not as fear, but as responsibility. A king does not mourn what he has lost. A king rebuilds. He stood at the edge of the crater, the lifeless plain stretching in every direction. Far beyond the horizon, the green glow of more awakening tombs flickered beneath the clouds. This world was not done with him. He spoke quietly, almost to himself, though the words carried in the dead air. "Wakanda lives in me, and as long as I breathe, so does her will." Lightning flashed, distant and cold. The wind rose again, sweeping across the broken land like a warning. T'Challa's eyes followed the direction of the storm. There was purpose in that wind, an invitation and a challenge. He turned toward it, his new armor catching the faint green light of the dying machines. The glow traced across his body like ancestral markings reborn in alien fire. The Black Panther walked forward, no longer the ruler of a hidden nation, but a solitary king in an unforgiving galaxy. Behind him, the earth trembled once more. Far beneath the surface, something vast shifted in its tomb, and the whisper of metal against metal echoed through the dark. The storm ahead waited, and the king was ready to meet it. The storm drifted far to the east, fading into a thin horizon of crimson haze. What remained was stillness, so complete that even the sound of breath felt intrusive. Days passed without measure. There was no sun to rise, no night to end. The sky hung in perpetual dusk, heavy and unmoving. The world seemed to breathe only when the wind remembered how. T'Challa wandered across it in silence. His footsteps left shallow impressions in the iron dust, and even those vanished within minutes, swallowed by the restless air. Each step carried the echo of a question that had no answer. Where was he? The stars above gave him nothing, shifting patterns, constellations, rearranged like broken glass. The instruments in his suit could not read the atmosphere. His sensors mapped only fragments, decayed structures buried beneath the surface, tunnels reaching into infinite depth. He began to understand this place was not truly a planet. It was a tomb. The ground itself felt hollow, resonant, filled with the quiet hum of machines dreaming in their sleep. The air shimmered faintly with energy, a radiation that was neither heat nor light, but memory. Millions of years of death condensed into silence. He gave it a name, N'Garath, the planet of silence, a grave world, forgotten by the living and ignored by the dead. At times the silence pressed too hard. It crawled under his armor, under his skin, whispering in voices that sounded almost human. The language was unknown, but the rhythm of it felt mournful, like a choir singing from beneath the earth. He would stop and listen. Always the sound came from below. Once, while resting among the ruins of a half-buried spire, he discovered markings etched into the blackened metal, lines that glowed faintly when his fingers brushed against them. The symbols were older than any script he knew, but the meaning was simple enough to feel. Here lies eternity. Here sleep the makers of their own undoing. He stepped back. The weight of it settled over him like dust. In that moment, the enormity of the galaxy pressed in. On Earth he had fought armies, gods, kings. Here he stood at the edge of a history so ancient it mocked the idea of time. He closed his eyes, letting the stillness wash through him. The absence of vibranium still ached in his chest, yet something deeper began to take its place, resolve. He had been sent here, not by chance, but by something deliberate. Perhaps by Bast, perhaps by the storm itself, perhaps by the will of a universe that had grown tired of silence. The dust swirled, carrying a faint hum through the still air. Beneath the surface, machines stirred again, faint but growing. He turned his gaze to the dark horizon, the faint light of his armor reflecting in the dust like a dying star. Whatever had made this world sleep was waking once more, and he would be here to meet it. The silence of N'Garath did not last. It never does. Silence is only the breath before the scream. It began as a low vibration in the soil, steady, rhythmic, almost like drums played deep underground. Then came the dust, rising in lazy spirals, and the faint shimmer of movement between the distant ridges. T'Challa crouched low against a jagged outcrop, his senses reaching outward. The faint hum of energy grew stronger, pulsing through the air like a living thing. The machines below were not just waking, they were hunting. Shadows began to form within the storm. Metallic silhouettes moved with purpose, gliding over the ground as if the world itself carried them. Their eyes burned in pairs of green light, scanning, searching, whispering to one another in static. They did not march in lines or ranks. They moved like predators. The wind shifted. T'Challa caught their scent, or what passed for one, a mixture of cold metal and the faint tang of ozone. He breathed slowly, his heartbeat steady, his body still. The Necron alloy woven into his armor hummed in recognition. The dead technology of this world could sense its own blood in him. It was both shield and curse. When the first of them broke formation, its gaze turned toward him, a faint whine of energy building behind its jaw. The shot came silently, a beam of green light cutting the air where he had stood a moment earlier. He moved like a shadow reborn. His leap carried him through dust and static, landing behind the creature. A single strike severed the cables at its neck. The head fell, still glowing. The body stood for a moment longer before collapsing with a hollow clang. The others reacted instantly. Their movements were not chaotic. They were cold, efficient, ancient. Bolts of energy cut through the darkness, carving lines of molten glass across the ground. T'Challa weaved through them, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Each step, each strike was silent, graceful, final. He used the terrain as weapon and shield, vanishing behind metal ridges only to reappear above them. His claws flashed once, twice, 3 times. Sparks filled the air like dying stars. When the last of the hunters fell, the wind returned, brushing against the scorched ground. The faint hum of dying circuits faded, replaced by the whisper of distant thunder. He stood among the wreckage, breathing slow, the glow from his modified suit, faint but alive. For every strike he made, the suit learned more, absorbing traces of energy, adjusting, adapting. He looked toward the distant horizon where more green lights flickered beneath the storm. They would not stop coming. He did not expect them to. The king of Wakanda was no stranger to the hunt. But this was different. On Earth, the hunt had always been for justice, for survival, for protection. Here it was for understanding. For purpose, each fallen machine carried a piece of a riddle older than life itself. And he intended to solve it. He crouched, pressing a hand to the cold earth. Beneath the surface, the vibrations had changed, no longer random, but rhythmic. A message, a pattern. He whispered softly to the dust, the words half prayer, half promise. "You will not bury me in your silence." Then he moved again, swift, unseen, unstoppable, disappearing into the iron fog. The hunt had begun. The calm that followed the hunt did not last. Peace was a luxury this galaxy had long forgotten. Days, or perhaps weeks, passed without measure beneath N'Garath's blood-red sky. T'Challa learned to listen to its rhythm, to the quiet tremors beneath the ground, to the storms that moved like great lungs breathing in the distance. Each night he found a new pattern in the stars, though none of them belonged to home. But one morning the pattern changed. The clouds began to glow, not with lightning this time, but with descending fire. The air thickened, the dust lifted, the heavens split open as metal giants fell from orbit, wrapped in trails of flame. The noise was deafening, thunder that shook the bones of the planet itself. The ground fractured, throwing T'Challa to his knees. He watched as the sky filled with iron wings and burning light. The Imperium had arrived. Vessels the size of cities descended through the clouds, black silhouettes etched with gold, covered in purity seals and burning with engine fire. They were not explorers. They were executioners. At first, T'Challa thought the world itself had rebelled against him. But as the ships settled, he saw their banners, skulls, eagles, and a single, unblinking eye. Through his helmet's cracked lenses, he magnified the nearest impact site. Hundreds of figures poured from the drop craft, armor gleaming like obsidian and brass. Their movements were ritual, almost holy. They carried no curiosity, only purpose. Voices rose through the storm, amplified by vox casters. Words in a language he barely recognized, filled with praise, duty, and the promise of fire. A single phrase repeated again and again, cutting through the static. Purge the unclean, purge the abomination. He understood enough. They were not here to study the awakening tombs. They were here to erase them and anything else they found. The first bombardment struck miles away, yet the shock wave arrived like a hammer. T'Challa braced himself against a rusted pillar, watching as a mountain of glass and steel folded inward on itself. Flames rose in its place, licking the red sky. He could feel their weapons in the air, atomic, sacred, merciless. Their precision was born not of hate, but of faith. The war machines of the Imperium moved across the horizon, methodical and unstoppable. Tanks the size of fortresses rolled through the ash plains, flanked by soldiers in steel masks reciting hymns of destruction. T'Challa stood in the wind, cloak torn, claws dim. He watched not with fear, but understanding. Humanity had survived its gods only to become them. He whispered quietly, a line more thought than sound. Even among the stars, man still brings his war. The scent of oil and ozone filled the air. In the distance, the Imperial crusade met the Necron awakening. Bolts of green and fire red lit the horizon, colliding in blinding arcs. The sound was endless, a chorus of annihilation, and somewhere in the middle of it all, a voice came through the static of his comms, cracked, human, desperate, unknown signal detected, non-imperial life form in the combat zone. The ground shook again. Closer this time, searchlights swept the wasteland. The hunters had changed, but the hunt continued. T'Challa turned toward the approaching thunder of drop pods, his stance calm, his expression unreadable beneath the cracked mask. The galaxy had found him, and once again, the king stood ready. The thunder of landing craft faded into the low groan of engines cooling on scorched metal. Dust rolled across the wasteland like a tide of ghosts. In the haze of settling ash, the Imperium soldiers moved with grim purpose, hundreds of armored figures advancing in perfect formation, their steps falling in rhythm with the beating heart of war. T'Challa watched them from the edge of a broken ridge, the cracked lenses of his mask reflecting the glow of their banners. Each warrior carried the symbol of a dying empire, the two-headed eagle of the Imperium, gilded and worn, painted over armor that bore scars older than memory. When they found him, it was by design, not by accident. He had allowed them to, searchlights locked on his silhouette, bathing him in white fire. Voices barked through metallic filters, commands, warnings, words that carried neither malice nor mercy. Identify yourself. Xeno life form detected. Lay down your arms and kneel before the Inquisition. He did not move. The wind tugged at the torn edges of his cloak. His eyes, hidden behind the fractured visor, remained steady. The soldiers spread into a semicircle, rifles raised. Behind them, a taller figure emerged, draped in dark robes and silver sigils of authority. Her armor was unpainted steel, her expression unreadable behind a mask carved in the likeness of an angel's face. The mark on her chest plate said everything, the eye of the Inquisition. The woman's voice cut through the static, firm but not cruel. You stand on a world quarantined by decree of the Holy Ordos. You will answer for your presence, creature. Creature. The word hung in the air like a blade. T'Challa's voice, when it came, was calm and low, each syllable deliberate. I am no creature. My name is T'Challa, son of T'Chaka, king of Wakanda. The soldiers glanced at one another. The name meant nothing to them. Their leader tilted her head slightly. Your tongue carries no record in our archives. There is no world called Wakanda within Imperial star charts. You will submit for examination. He raised his head slowly. I submit to no one. The soldiers moved instantly. Dozens of barrels fixed on him, humming with charged energy. The Inquisitor's hand lifted, a silent command to hold fire. Her tone changed, quieter now, curiosity beneath caution. What are you then? Human? Mutant? Machine? T'Challa turned slightly, the light catching the green edges of his reforged armor. "I am a protector. That is all you need know." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer, as if searching for something behind the words. Then her voice hardened again. "Protection is not a virtue here. It is permission given by the Emperor alone. You will come with us. Refuse, and you will be purged," he exhaled slowly. The sound of his breath was almost lost in the wind. "Your empire? It speaks of gods and order. But I see only fear." The soldiers stiffened. The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed behind the mask. For a heartbeat, silence returned, tense, alive, ready to break. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but cold. "Fear is what keeps mankind alive." The words carried weight, the kind of faith that did not bend. A chain snapped around his wrists. The metal hummed with energy, locking tight. He did not resist. Resistance now would have been meaningless. He allowed himself to be led away, not in defeat, but in patience. As they escorted him toward the waiting dropship, he lifted his gaze once more to the storm-torn sky. The rift that had brought him here still burned faintly in the distance, a wound between worlds. He whispered to it beneath his breath, words no one else could hear. "If this is your will, Bast, then I will see it through." Behind him the soldiers marched in silence, their faith heavy as armor. Ahead the ship waited, a prison of light and iron. The king had entered their empire, and they would soon learn what kind of creature he truly was. The world beyond the ridge lay drowned in smoke and light. Ships from the Imperium hung in the sky like burning crosses, their engines howling in praise of war. The air trembled beneath the weight of their faith. Through that haze, the king was found. Searchlights cut across the plain until they fixed upon his still figure, standing among the wreckage of alien steel. Voices followed, sharp, mechanical, stripped of humanity. The words carried the authority of an empire that had forgotten mercy. Hands of iron closed around him. Chains were placed upon his wrists, heavy with static. The metal burned faintly, humming with power that sought to judge his every breath. Around him, soldiers stood in silent reverence to duty, their armor painted with dust and the symbols of their god-emperor. He was brought before their commander, a woman whose armor gleamed like a mirror that refused to show reflection. The sigil of the Inquisition marked her chest, its single eye unblinking even in the storm. Her voice carried the weight of ritual when she spoke, each word falling like judgment. A creature stands before the servants of mankind. Its form resembles our own, but its origin lies beyond the Emperor's light. By decree, such beings are to be examined, then erased. No reply was offered. The wind alone answered her. The mask she wore hid her eyes, yet suspicion lived in every movement. Her soldiers waited for a command that would end him where he stood. But silence lingered, fragile and alive, stretched thin between faith and curiosity. The Inquisitor's voice softened. "You carry no corruption of the warp, yet your presence defies reason. Speak, stranger. What god claims you?" The king's reply came slowly, carried on a breath that tasted of iron dust. "No god claims me. Only my people." The chains hummed. The words were calm, but their simplicity unsettled the gathering. The creed of man had no place for loyalty that did not bow. The Inquisitor's fingers tightened around the hilt of her blade. Beneath her mask, her lips moved in quiet prayer. The chains hummed again, drawing faint green light from his alien armor. The glow reflected in her visor like a ghost's eye. For a heartbeat, understanding flickered there, fear not of corruption, but of possibility. He was bound, yet unbroken. A prisoner, yet unafraid. No plea for mercy escaped him. Only patience lingered in his stillness. When the command was finally given, the soldiers moved without sound. The king was led toward the waiting transport, its engines whispering psalms of obedience. The dust rose around them, erasing their footprints almost as soon as they were made. Above the clouds, the storm rift pulsed faintly, the same wound that had torn him from his world. Its light touched his face for a moment before vanishing behind smoke. In that fleeting glow, the faint echo of Bast's voice seemed to stir within him, not as comfort, but as reminder. A king's chains are never heavier than his silence. The ship's doors closed. The sound of thunder followed, and within the metal cage, the king waited, patient as the storm that had carried him here. The descent of the dropship was long and wordless. Metal walls shuddered with the strain of atmosphere, and the hymn of engines drowned all thought. The light inside burned dim and cold, casting every armored face into shadow. Among those figures, the king sat in silence. His hands rested within the bonds that glowed faintly around his wrists, yet there was no struggle. The stillness unsettled those who watched him. They had seen beasts, heretics and demons, but never a man so calm while held by the Inquisition. Across from him, the Inquisitor sat with her helm removed. Her face was pale beneath the grime, carved from discipline rather than cruelty. Eyes the color of forged steel studied him through the flicker of the ship's light. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than before. "You do not tremble, stranger. Not before my soldiers, not before the chains that silence worlds. Even a Primarch would kneel under their weight." The answer came not as defiance, but as truth, softly spoken. "Kneeling has never saved anyone. It only teaches others to forget they are free." The words lingered in the cold air. No prayer was spoken to drown them. No insult followed. The silence between them changed. It lost its sharpness, grew slower, thoughtful. Outside, lightning crawled across the ship's hull. The storm reflected in her eyes as she looked away. "You speak of freedom as if it were a god," she murmured. "But gods here demand obedience, not will." "Then perhaps your gods are afraid of their children," he replied. Her gaze returned to him, steady now, unflinching. She had seen zealots, monsters, false prophets born from the warp's deceit, and all had spoken with fire or madness. This one spoke with grief. It was the tone of a man who had already lost everything worth fearing for. The dropship lurched as it broke through the final cloud layer. The deck vibrated with the roar of distant artillery, the war between machine and faith still raging below. Her hand brushed against the activation rune on her blade, but did not press it. The question rose before she could bury it. "What is your purpose, King of Nowhere?" He lifted his head, his voice quiet as falling dust. "To keep the promise I made to the dead." The storm outside swallowed the sound of engines. For a breath, the Inquisitor forgot to speak. In the dim light, his eyes caught the reflection of fire through the viewport. Whole continents burning in silence. His gaze did not waver. Strength without pride, conviction without command. It was not what she expected of an alien king. A strange respect stirred within her, a spark small enough to hide beneath duty, yet too bright to extinguish. The ship descended through clouds of war. Neither spoke again. Only the hum of the engines carried them forward, a single pulse through the endless dark, where suspicion began to turn into understanding. The descent ended in thunder. The ship settled upon a wasteland of broken glass and blackened stone, its hull hissing as heat met the frozen air. The sound of the engines faded, replaced by the slow hum of something far older stirring beneath the crust of the planet. The soldiers of the Imperium stepped out first, their armor glinting faintly beneath the red sky. Every movement followed ritual, every breath a prayer. The air around them vibrated with the echo of hymns whispered through vox channels, praises offered to a god who had never answered. The king followed, still bound, still silent. The ground beneath his feet felt alive. A faint rhythm pulsed through the soil, deeper than stone, older than memory. The Imperium had come to destroy the Necron tombs, but the tombs had already begun to awaken. The first tremor arrived as a murmur beneath their boots. The next came stronger, shaking dust from the mountains. A sound rose from the depths, 1,000 metallic voices chanting without breath, without emotion. The Inquisitor raised a hand, signaling for her troops to form ranks. Her gaze turned to the horizon, where the desert rippled like water. The light there changed from red to green. Shapes emerged, slow and deliberate, as the sand parted to reveal the dead who had never truly died. The soldiers began their litany. By fire and faith, cleanse the machine-born. Bolters were raised, laser-guns primed, prayers muttered through clenched teeth. The first volley struck the emerging figures, tearing through metal and bone alike. But the dead did not fall. They only advanced. Green lightning split the plain. Beams of impossible light cut through the ranks, turning flesh and armor into dust. The hymns faltered. The ground cracked open. Whole battalions vanished into the earth as tomb gates yawned wide. The Inquisitor drew her blade, its edge humming with sanctified energy. Her voice carried through the chaos. "Hold the line! The Emperor watches!" Yet the king saw something she could not. The movement of the energy beneath the surface, the pulse of a buried heart awakening. The storm above mirrored the rhythm below. The planet was not dying. It was remembering. Chains still bound his wrists, but his mind had never been freer. The air shimmered with green flame, casting long shadows across the plain. In that light, the past and the present seemed to fold together. The warriors of Wakanda, the soldiers of the Imperium, the machines of Ngarath, all bound by the same cycle of fear and faith. When the ground split beneath his feet, instinct replaced reason. The chains broke under the strain, their light fading into sparks. The Inquisitor turned at the sound but said nothing. Her eyes met his through the smoke, and for the first time the question of who was enemy and who was ally no longer had an answer. The tomb world roared. Rivers of light spilled upward, bathing the battlefield in green fire. The air itself became a weapon. The Imperium answered with fury and prayer, but the balance of the battle shifted toward the dead. In the heart of it, the king stood unbowed, the dust swirling around him in a silent storm. The world below was waking, and his presence had been its signal. The earth trembled again, this time not in anger, but in recognition. The dead had found something they understood, a soul forged from discipline and faith, untainted by gods. And beneath the chorus of war, the whisper of Bast stirred once more within him, faint but certain. "Even here, my son, the ancestors walk with you." The light of the upper world vanished as the ground swallowed them whole. The descent was sudden, a collapse of sand and metal that dragged the living into the heart of the tomb. Sound became pressure. Breath turned to heat. The world above shrank into a single beam of light before closing like an eye. Darkness took its place. For a moment, there was no war, only the hum of the machines awakening in the deep. The soldiers' armor glowed faintly, their purity seals fluttering in the stale air. The Inquisitor's blade burned like a shard of dawn, the only warmth in the endless black. Then the tomb began to move. Walls shifted with the patience of gods. Pillars unfolded like skeletal limbs, revealing endless rows of slumbering forms, necrons, their bodies half buried in crystalline coffins, eyes flickering to life one by one. Each spark of green light joined the next until the chamber breathed with artificial stars. The soldiers opened fire. The echoes became thunder. Bolter rounds filled the dark with flame, ricocheting from walls that refused to break. The king moved through the chaos, every motion silent, every strike deliberate. The glow of his armor merged with the green light, so that for a heartbeat it seemed the tomb itself fought beside him. When the first of the dead lunged from the shadows, he met it not with rage, but with precision. Each movement followed the rhythm of his ancestors' drums, swift, controlled, inevitable. A claw through the throat, a turn, a strike through the spine. The machine fell before it could understand why. Around him, the Inquisitor's voice carried prayers into the dark. Her soldiers fought as believers, every death a sermon, every wound a vow. Yet even their faith began to waver as the dead kept coming. The chamber had no end. For every enemy that fell, another rose from the walls, their faces expressionless, their purpose eternal. The king's vision blurred with the glow of energy weapons. He felt the hum of power beneath the floor, steady, rising, ancient. The tomb was not simply a fortress. It was a heart, and now that heart was beating again. He leapt across a chasm where the floor had split open, landing beside a fallen guardsman. The man's breath was shallow, his eyes filled with fear. The king placed a hand upon his chest, steadying him, not with words, but with presence. The soldier's grip loosened. For a moment, the fear softened. In that moment, something changed. The Inquisitor saw it from across the field, the alien king covered in dust and light, shielding one of her own beneath his body. She hesitated before raising her weapon again. Doubt, sharp as a blade, found its place beside her faith. The storm within the tomb reached its peak. Light devoured shadow. Shadow devoured light. The clash of metal and flesh echoed upward through the tunnels like thunder carried on wind. When the dust settled, only fragments of the Necron army remained. Broken machines twitched in silence. The survivors of the Imperium knelt among the ruin, too tired to speak. The Inquisitor approached, her steps echoing softly on the stone. Her blade no longer glowed with threat, only with memory. The king stood before her, his armor cracked, his eyes calm. No words were exchanged. The silence spoke for both. Respect, fragile and wordless, passed between them like the last breath of a dying world. The dark around them grew quiet once more. The tomb's heart slowed, as if listening. And from that stillness came a single truth. Some wars are fought to destroy, others to remember. On this forgotten world, the two had become the same. The dust of battle settled slowly, drifting through the cavernous dark like ash from a forgotten fire. The air no longer trembled with weapons or prayer. Only the distant hum of the tomb remained, a low pulse like the slow breathing of an ancient god returning to its sleep. Bodies lay where faith and metal had collided. The silence that followed was not victory, but exhaustion. The survivors of the Imperium knelt among the ruin, their armor scorched, their faces hidden beneath cracked helms. No hymns were whispered now. Their god had not spoken back. In the middle of that stillness, the king moved. His steps were quiet, each one echoing faintly against the walls of black stone. The glow from his fractured armor was dim, yet steady, the green veins of alien alloy pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Around him, soldiers who had once aimed their weapons at his chest now watched him in silence. He bent beside a fallen guardsman whose hand still clutched a small icon of the Emperor. The man's breath came shallow, his eyes unfocused, his faith shaken. Without a word, T'Challa placed his hand upon the soldier's chest. The gesture was neither blessing nor command, only reassurance that life, however fragile, still remained. The soldier's trembling eased. His grip loosened around the icon. When he looked up, his gaze met that of the king, and for a fleeting heartbeat, the lines between alien and human blurred. The Inquisitor watched from the edge of the battlefield, her weapon lowered. The sight before her defied the laws she had sworn to uphold. The creature she had been taught to condemn now moved among her wounded with quiet grace, binding torn armor, lifting the fallen, whispering words she could not understand yet somehow felt. Her voice came at last, tired but steady. "You tend to my soldiers as if they were your own." The king's reply was quiet, more thought than speech. "A ruler is measured not by who he commands, but by whom he protects." The words carried through the dark like a tide, settling into the hearts of those who heard them. A strange calm spread among the weary survivors. Even the hum of the tomb seemed to quiet in their presence. The Inquisitor's eyes softened, though her expression remained unreadable. "You speak as one who has known loss." The king's gaze lifted toward the faint light filtering from above. "All kings know loss. It is the only crown that cannot be removed," the silence returned, gentle now. The soldiers rested where they stood, their weapons lowered. The air no longer carried the weight of suspicion, only the fragile understanding born of shared survival. The Inquisitor turned away first, signaling for her remaining troops to regroup. Her faith had not broken, but it had changed shape, less steel, more silence. The king remained where he was, his eyes tracing the dim carvings etched into the tomb walls. They spoke of empires long turned to dust, of rulers who had mistaken fear for devotion. The lesson was clear, even here among the dead. When he finally moved again, the sound of his steps carried differently, no longer that of a stranger, but of a leader walking among those who had begun to see him not as an enemy, but as something older, rarer, and far harder to name, a king among soldiers, not by decree, not by conquest, but by the quiet strength that endures when all other light fades. The air above the tomb was thin and bitter when they returned to the surface. The sky bled rust and stormlight, and the wreckage of battle lay scattered across the horizon, half-buried relics, the bones of machines, the smoke of pyres lit without prayer. The war had ended only because there was nothing left to destroy. The soldiers of the Imperium moved among the ruins, repairing what little could still function. Their hymns were gone, replaced by the hollow rhythm of tools striking metal. The world around them felt drained of purpose, as if even the wind had grown weary of carrying the scent of fire. In the center of that stillness stood the king. His armor no longer gleamed. Dust and blood had turned its surface to shadow. Yet there was something unbroken in his bearing, an echo of command that asked for no obedience but received it nonetheless. Wherever he stood, silence gathered as if to listen. The Inquisitor approached from the remains of a transport craft. Her helm was gone, her hair streaked with soot, her eyes sharp and questioning. No guards followed her. None were needed. The soldiers watched from a distance, uncertain whether this meeting was duty or confession. She stopped before him, the storm wind tugging at her cloak. "You fought beside us when you could have fled," she said, her voice lower than the wind. "You owe us no allegiance, yet you bleed for our cause." "Why?" The answer came as softly as the dusk. "Because no cause deserves to burn alone." Her gaze lingered on him, and for a moment faith and doubt wrestled behind her eyes. Then her hand moved to the seal at her waist. The sigil of the Inquisition glinted like a dying star. "There is a place for beings like you," she said, "within the Ordos among the sanctioned. Serve under my command, and you will be spared the Emperor's judgment. You could fight for a purpose larger than yourself." The king's head lowered slightly, the shadow of a smile flickering and fading before it could be called emotion. A king who fights beneath another's banner ceases to be a king. He becomes a weapon. The words hung between them, heavy and final. The Inquisitor's jaw tightened, but her eyes did not harden. She understood more than she wished to. Her voice, when it returned, was quieter. Purpose is all that keeps us from falling to madness. Without it, even kings break. He looked beyond her, toward the horizon where the ruins glowed faintly in the stormlight. And let my purpose be to keep others from breaking first. She said nothing more. The offer remained between them like an unspoken treaty, born from respect, buried by necessity. When she turned away, the soldiers parted without a word. The king watched until the last trace of her cloak vanished into the dust. The chains that had once bound his wrists now hung at his side, fragments of iron twisted into symbols of freedom. The storm rolled low across the plain, carrying with it the scent of coming rain. He stood alone again, but not forsaken. The choice had been made, and its weight felt neither victory nor regret, only truth. A king does not serve. He endures. The silence that followed the Inquisitor's departure did not last. Silence rarely does in a galaxy built on war. The wind turned colder, its edge carrying something that was not wind at all, a murmur that pressed against the edges of thought. It slipped between heartbeats and coiled around memory, a whisper, not made of sound, but of knowing. The king stood alone upon the plain, the last light of the dying sun falling across the broken horizon. The air felt heavier now, filled with static and echoes of words never spoken aloud. The dust around his feet began to shift, forming patterns too precise to be made by chance, spirals that bled into one another until they resembled eyes that blinked without faces. He closed his eyes, listening. The hum was not mechanical. It was ancient, endless, alive. The same energy that had carried him through the storm now moved again, though softer, more insidious. King of Shadows. The voice came as a thought that did not belong to him. It slid through the cracks of his mind, smooth as oil, calm as death. The stars have seen you. The veil knows your name. His breath slowed. He did not answer. To speak into that silence would be to invite it closer. But the whisper persisted, tender and cruel all at once.
You were not taken.
You were chosen. There are gods here who admire what you are. They offer you power beyond the limits of flesh. A flash of memory crossed his mind. Shuri's laughter, his father's voice, the roar of his ancestors calling from the golden fields of the dead. Those echoes burned bright for a moment before the whisper smothered them again. You are alone, T'Challa, but you need not remain so. Accept their gaze, and the stars will kneel to your will. The king opened his eyes. The storm had grown still. The air tasted of metal and memory. Across the sky, veins of unnatural light spread like cracks in glass. The warp was listening. It always listened when something powerful refused to bow. He lowered his head, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against him. The whisper grew softer, almost kind. Every king kneels eventually. Every god answers to something greater. He drew a slow breath, his voice little more than a murmur lost to the wind. Then they will wait forever. The patterns in the dust unraveled. The air shuddered. The whisper receded, not defeated, but patient. The warp never forgot those who resisted it. It merely waited for the cracks to widen. He stood beneath the bruised sky until the last echo faded. The scent of ozone lingered, sharp and bitter. The quiet returned, but it was no longer the same quiet as before. It was thinner, fragile, as though reality itself had learned his name. Far beyond the storm, unseen eyes turned their gaze toward him, and the first ripples of destiny began to spread through the void. The king walked on, the whispers following just beyond hearing, carried by the wind that had once been his only companion. Night came without stars. The storm had quieted, yet the air carried a strange weight, as if the world itself held its breath. The dust no longer moved, the silence no longer comforted. The king sat upon a ridge of blackened stone, his eyes fixed on the void above. Sleep did not claim him. Vision did. A light, soft and golden, bled through the horizon. It did not belong to this world. It moved like water and sang like memory. When it reached him, warmth replaced the chill that had settled in his bones. The plain dissolved, the smell of iron and ash gave way to rain and earth. For a heartbeat, the wind spoke the language of Wakanda again. Before him rose the ancestral plain, endless grass beneath a violet sky, the silhouettes of panthers pacing in the distance. The air shimmered with voices that were not voices, laughter that was not sound. He knew this place. He had walked it before in dreams and death alike. Out of the light stepped Bast. Her form shifted between woman and shadowed cat, her eyes deep as the void between galaxies. Each word she spoke trembled through his chest rather than his ears. My son walks beyond the sight of the ancestors. The Diata. King bowed his head, the weight of her presence both blessing and burden. I was torn from home. I walk among ghosts of iron and gods without mercy. I do not understand why. The goddess's gaze softened, a dawn hidden inside the dark. Because even in this place the balance falters, the galaxy drowns in worship without wisdom. They have forgotten what it means to protect. Her hand, if it could be called that, touched the crest of his armor. The broken plates shimmered, the foreign alloy bending in patterns that resembled the sacred markings of Wakanda. Where green light had once flickered, violet fire now stirred, soft but alive. This gift is not strength, she whispered. It is remembrance. When the world tries to make you a god, remember the man who kneels before his people. The plain began to fade, the sound of drums fading into the pulse of the wind. Bast's form dissolved. Into the stormlight, her final words lingering like breath. Go, my son. Teach them that power without mercy is hollow. Let them see a king who protects, not a god who rules. The warmth vanished. The cold of Ngarath returned. The sky remained empty, yet his chest burned with quiet fire. The armor hummed. With new life, different from vibranium, quieter than the alien alloy, but balanced between both. He rose slowly, the dust swirling at his feet, as if drawn to his pulse. The gift was not meant for conquest. It was a reminder that even in a universe of endless war, compassion could still be power. The storm stirred once more on the horizon, carrying whispers of battle and faith. The king turned toward it, his eyes calm. The goddess had spoken, and the silence of the galaxy would soon listen. Morning returned as a dim red glow behind the storm. The wind carried the scent of ash and melted iron, but beneath it stirred something new. Breath, faint and human. From the ruins of the battlefield, survivors began to rise. Guardsmen broken and scarred, wanderers who had fled the Inquisition's reach, men and women whose faith had faltered in the shadow of endless war. They gathered wordlessly, drawn by an instinct they could not name. Among them the king walked, his armor alive with quiet violet light. No command was given, yet they followed. In a world ruled by decrees and dogma, silence became his language, and stillness his authority. They built shelters from the wreckage of ships fires from the shattered fuel cells of Imperial machines. At night, they spoke in whispers about the one who walked without fear. To the Imperium, he was a fugitive. To the broken, he became something else, a protector, not sent by gods but born of defiance. In the following days, those who had nothing left to worship began to find purpose in his shadow. He did not crown himself, yet the title found him, King of the Lost, the Panther in the Storm. Under his quiet guidance, they learned to fight not for conquest but survival. The weapons of the Imperium were remade in his image, stripped of purity, seals, cleansed of symbols of hate, reassembled with intention. Blades were forged from the bones of fallen machines, armor painted in the deep black of night so they might move unseen. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried through the silence like distant thunder. "We are not here to rule," he told them. "We are here to remind the stars that mercy has not yet died." Their camp became a haven for the forgotten. Outcasts, deserters, psychers, cast aside by fear, all found refuge under his watch. The whispers spread beyond Angareth, carried by wandering traders and broken astropaths. They spoke of a nameless legion led by a king who wore no crown, whose eyes burned like amethyst fire, whose people bowed to no god, and so they called themselves the Panther Legion. They moved in shadows, striking where tyranny ruled unchecked. When imperial fleets bombarded rebel colonies, they shielded the innocent. When chaos cults claimed souls for the warp, they burned the altars but spared the believers. No planet belonged to them, yet every world that suffered became their responsibility. The galaxy, in all its cruelty, began to take notice. To the Imperium, they were heretics. To the Inquisition, a threat. But to those who had forgotten hope, they were salvation. The king watched his new warriors from the edge of the camp as they trained under the pale light. He saw in their movements the rhythm of Wakanda's heart, the same grace, the same unity, reborn in a place without memory of either. The storm above rumbled softly, as if the gods themselves were forced to listen. The Black Panther had come to the galaxy not to rule it, but to remind it that even in the age of endless war, compassion could still build an army. The storm lingered on the horizon for many nights, though it no longer felt like threat, but witness. The red light that had once meant ruin now washed over the camp like the first color of dawn. The makeshift banners of the Panther Legion hung, motionless in the wind, fabric woven from scavenged armor and painted in deep violet, marked with the faint outline of a single paw. At the center of the camp, the king stood before his people. The faces that turned toward him were lined with exhaustion and disbelief, yet behind their weariness lived something fragile and rare, faith not in gods or empires, but in one another. He spoke without volume, his words falling into the silence like pebbles into still water. "We fight not for conquest," he said, "and not for vengeance. The stars burn with enough of both." The crowd listened, unmoving. The crackle of distant lightning was the only sound between his sentences. "We fight for peace, not as a promise, but as a discipline. We fight to remind the galaxy that mercy still has teeth, that it is not weakness to protect what cannot protect itself." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. The quiet strength within it filled the air more completely than any shout could have done. He looked upon them not as soldiers, but as the remnants of something worth rebuilding. Each man and woman carried the ghosts of their old lives, and each ghost now stood behind him. The glow of their campfire caught the green alloy of his armor, softening it into violet, as though the light itself had begun to remember Wakanda. When he finished speaking, no cheer followed, only stillness. Then, one by one, those who listened placed their right hands across their chests in silent vow. No oaths were sworn aloud, no names written. The act itself was enough. Thus was born the Creed of the Panther Legion, a vow carried not in scripture but in the quiet places of the heart, to fight without hate, to lead without crown, to protect without reward. In the days that followed, those words shaped them more deeply than any command. They no longer marched to hymns of fire, but moved through the galaxy as shadows, seen only when protection was needed, remembered only when the storms had passed. Rumors of them spread quickly, finding their way into the mouths of priests and smugglers alike. Some said they were angels fallen from forgotten heavens. Others claimed they were heretics born of the warp's defiance. But among the broken and the oppressed, the whispers carried one simple truth: the Panther had given them back their courage. When night returned, the king stood alone at the edge of the encampment. The air hummed softly with the breath of his people at rest. Above, the storm finally parted enough for a single star to shine through, faint, unfamiliar, yet steady. He watched it in silence. The universe was still vast and cruel, yet somewhere within it, the idea of peace had taken root again. And in that fragile light, the king's vow deepened. He would protect it, no matter what gods or empires tried to smother it next. The galaxy never stays blind for long. Whispers of rebellion move faster than light, and in the Imperium, whispers are treated as prophecy. Far above the world of Nagarath, an Imperial command vessel hung in orbit, a fortress of metal and faith. Within its sanctum of steel, the Inquisition convened. Cold light bathed the chamber, reflecting from armor etched with prayers of authority. Every breath there was a law waiting to be spoken. Reports filled the air, carried on holographic light. Planets freed from tyranny without sanction. Imperial patrols encountering masked warriors who fought with precision but refused allegiance. Villages untouched by plague because unseen hands had healed them. Each record ended the same way, with the symbol of a black paw painted upon stone, armor, or sky. At the center of the council stood Inquisitor Alarielle, the same who had once bound the king in chains. Her face was older now, her eyes sharper but quieter. Around her, the other lords of the Ordos debated his existence with voices as heavy as the Empire itself. "He commands heretics," one said. "He turns the Emperor's enemies into soldiers. Such mercy breeds infection, fights chaos," another countered. "He saves worlds that even our fleets abandoned." "Would you condemn victory because it wears no seal?" The chamber trembled beneath the weight of disagreement. The name of T'Challa had become an argument in itself, proof that even the Imperium's faith could fracture when faced with something it could not define. At last, Alarielle spoke. Her voice carried no command, only memory. "He could have destroyed us the day the tomb awoke. He did not. He could have vanished into the void. Instead, he built a refuge from what we left behind." Her words fell into silence. Some turned away. Others clenched their fists in quiet fury. The truth was a wound they could neither close nor cleanse. An order was drafted, sealed with the sigil of the High Lords. It bore 3 words: observation, containment, if necessary, purge. But as the decree spread through the command channels, a strange unease settled over the Inquisition. The pattern of the king's actions defied their creed. He claimed no territory, demanded no worship, and left no corpses for glory. Each act of his legion weakened chaos without strengthening rebellion. Each victory restored life where the Imperium had abandoned it. Such purity, they decided, could not last. No mortal could carry light without eventually being consumed by its shadow. Far below, unaware of the Council's verdict, the Panther Legion continued to move between worlds like wind through iron forests. They fought where others could not and vanished before any banner could claim them. The galaxy called them ghosts. The Inquisition called them danger. And the king, who had once walked alone through dust and silence, now carried the gaze of an empire upon his back. But he felt it not as threat, only as inevitability. The light of the Imperium would come for him, as all light does for even mercy when it grows too bright, becomes something the dark cannot ignore. The first signs of the Imperium's gaze appeared not as armies, but as omens. Vox channels, once silent, began to whisper again. Ships, long forgotten by trade, drifted close to their refuge, their hulls marked with sigils that pulsed faintly in the dark. Above each world they visited, the stars seemed to dim, as though afraid to witness what was coming. The king felt the change before any words reached him. The air itself grew tense, heavy with the weight of approaching judgment. Around the fires of their camp, his people spoke of visions, dreams filled with gold and iron, of eyes that bled light and voices that offered salvation at the cost of freedom. Among them, the younger ones asked if the Imperium would come to destroy them. The older ones answered with silence, for they had lived long enough to know that destruction was not always loud. Sometimes it came disguised as law. When the Inquisitor's fleet finally descended upon the nearest moon, it came without fanfare. The sky broke open in quiet fire, and ships slid through the clouds like blades drawn slow from their sheaths. The soldiers who emerged were not zealots. They were tired men, bound by duty. They carried icons of the Emperor, not out of faith, but out of fear of what would happen if they did not. From the shadows of the ridge the king watched their arrival. His armor reflected the pale light of their landing torches, violet against the cold silver of their steel. His people waited for command, but none came. Orders were not his way. He believed in readiness, not reaction. That night he walked alone to the edge of their camp. The horizon burned faintly with the glow of Imperial engines. He knew the Inquisition would not attack outright. They would first test his resolve, offer promises draped in righteousness. He knew because he had once heard such words himself. When dawn came, the sky was red again. A lone messenger crossed the no-man's land between the two forces, bearing a white banner etched with the twin-headed eagle. The man's voice trembled as he read the decree. The Imperium of Man recognizes the one called the Black King as an unregistered xeno-entity operating beyond sanctioned rule. You are commanded to kneel before the Emperor's justice, to disband your legion, and to surrender the worlds you have claimed. Compliance will be met with mercy. Refusal will be met with fire. The soldiers behind the messenger waited for answer. None came. The king stood silent for a long time, the wind moving through the tattered cloak at his shoulders. Finally, he stepped forward until the distance between them was small enough for his words to be carried without echo. "Tell your masters," he said softly, "that I kneel only to the ancestors who made me." The messenger hesitated. Then, as if sensing something beyond his orders, he lowered his banner. He turned and walked back through the storm. The wind rose behind him, carrying dust that glowed faintly violet. The first act of defiance had been made, not with war, but with words that could not be undone. Far above, in the void between stars, the eyes of the Imperium turned colder. In the depths of its golden halls, judgment began to move, slow and inevitable, toward the king who had refused to bow. The storm that followed was not of wind or rain, but of conviction. The Imperium moved as it always had. slow, vast, and unstoppable. Faith became the fire that devoured reason. The order of purge spread through the channels of command like scripture recited too often to be questioned. Armies assembled in orbit, their banners glowing with the emperor's sigil. To the common soldier, it was not cruelty, it was obedience, and obedience was survival. On the surface, the Panther Legion prepared in silence. The king stood among his people, his eyes tracing the sky where light flickered from descending vessels. The air vibrated with the low hum of re-entry. Each beam of fire from the heavens carried both awe and sorrow. No panic stirred within the camp. They had long since learned that fear served no purpose. The king walked through their ranks as the engines screamed above. His voice was low, steady, and it carried through the wind. Do not meet fire with fire.
Meet it with resolve.
We fight not to conquer, but to endure.
They come with faith.
We stand with truth. Around him, soldiers tightened their armor, whispered brief prayers of their own, some to gods they no longer believed in, others to the ancestors whose names had been lost. The glow of their weapons merged with the violet shimmer of their king's armor, forming a soft light that seemed to push back the coming night. The sky broke open. Drop pods tore through the clouds, raining steel upon the plains. The ground shook and light devoured shadow. From the wreckage emerged the warriors of the Imperium, Astartes, armored in black and gold, their every step a sermon. Behind them came the banners of the Inquisition. The two forces faced each other across the field, one born of law, the other of mercy. Between them stood history's oldest lie, that righteousness belonged to power. The first voice to rise was not the king's, but the Inquisitor's. Alarielle stepped forward, her cloak burned and torn by dissent, her expression hidden behind the mask of duty. "T'Challa," she called, her voice trembling with something that might have been sorrow. "Stand down."
I begged them for mercy, but the decree is beyond my reach.
"They will not stop until you kneel." The king's head bowed slightly. "Then we do not stop until they see." No battle cry followed. No fury answered the heavens. The Panther Legion moved as shadows, silent and deliberate. The first wave of imperial fire struck the earth, carving molten lines through the stone. The Legion did not scatter. They flowed around the destruction like water around rock. The storm became chaos, bolter fire, plasma arcs, the scream of burning air. Amid it the king moved like the eye of the tempest. He did not seek death nor deal it carelessly. Each motion was a balance between restraint and necessity, a dance between mercy and survival. The Inquisitor watched through the haze, her certainty eroding with every breath. The soldiers she commanded fell not to hate, but to the truth of their own blindness. In the heart of war, she saw what her empire had long forgotten, a strength born not from domination, but from compassion that refused to yield. When the smoke cleared, neither side had won. The plain was scorched, the air heavy with ash and silence. The Imperium retreated to regroup. The Legion buried its fallen in quiet reverence. Above, the heavens still burned, but the king did not look away. His eyes reflected both fire and sorrow. He had fought without hatred, but the universe mistook restraint for weakness. He knew they would return, and when they did, mercy alone would not be enough to save them. The fire of obedience had been met by the will of a king, and though the flames still raged, the world itself seemed to hesitate, uncertain which light was more divine. When the echoes of battle faded, only wind remained to speak. It carried the scent of blood and rain over the broken plains, moving gently between the bodies of friend and foe alike. The flames that had devoured the horizon now smouldered in silence, their smoke rising into a sky that no longer looked alive. The Panther Legion, stood among the wreckage, weary but unbroken. Their armor was blackened, their voices low. They did not chant, they did not celebrate. Victory, here, felt no different from mourning. The king walked between them without word or crown. His steps left no mark in the dust, yet every gaze followed him as if the air itself bowed in his passing. The faces around him told the story of mercy's cost, eyes that had seen too much, hands that trembled even as they healed. At the center of the field lay the fallen of both sides. He stopped there. The silence pressed against his chest until his breath grew shallow. The dead wore the armor of the Imperium, their insignia burned away by plasma and fire. They had come to destroy him, and now they rested beneath the sky they had sworn to defend. He knelt beside one of them, a soldier whose mask had cracked open to reveal a face still young enough to hope. The boy's hand still clutched a medallion of the Emperor, worn smooth from years of prayer. The king lifted it gently, turning it between his fingers. The metal was warm, as if holding the last breath of faith. A voice rose behind him, soft, uncertain. "My king, what should be done with them?" He did not answer at once. The firelight flickered in his eyes as though caught between reflection and flame.
At last he spoke.
"They will be buried as we are."
No enemy rests in the dust alone. No one questioned him.
The soldiers of the Panther Legion began their quiet work, lifting the fallen of the Imperium beside their own. No banners were raised, no words spoken.
Only the rhythm of shovels and the whisper of earth.
The war that had sought to erase compassion had instead been ended by it. The Inquisitor watched from afar, her armor scorched, her faith heavier than before. She had led the attack, but her heart had not survived it untouched. Each burial struck her like confession, each grave a reminder that righteousness could bleed. When the final body was laid to rest, the king stood once more. The violet glow of his armor pulsed faintly, reflecting off the endless rows of stone and ash. He looked not to the heavens, but to the horizon where light still dared to exist. "Mercy," he murmured, "is the heaviest weapon of all." The words drifted into the wind, finding their place among the echoes of a dying world. The soldiers heard them and understood, not as command, but as truth. Mercy demanded endurance. Mercy demanded the strength to rise again tomorrow, even when the world would only try to burn once more. As night fell, the graves of the dead became the only stars upon the earth, silent,
Countless, and bright enough to remind the living that even in ruin,
compassion could still outshine war. The following dawn arrived pale and uncertain, its light thin as breath through the dust. The battlefield had grown quiet, its silence stretched across the horizon like a shroud. Fires no longer burned. Only embers glowed faintly, fragile reminders of the storm that had passed. From that stillness came movement, slow, deliberate. A single figure emerged from the haze, the weight of command clinging to every step. The Inquisitor returned. Her armor no longer gleamed. It was cracked, scorched, stripped of its symbols. The mark of the Inquisition had been torn from her chestplate, leaving only the scar of metal beneath. Around her neck, the purity seals fluttered in the faint wind like broken wings. She walked unguarded, her weapon left behind, her purpose changed. The soldiers of the Panther Legion saw her approach. No alarm was raised. The king had already felt her presence long before she came into view. He stood at the edge of the encampment, his silhouette outlined against the dim red sky, his posture still and waiting. When she reached him, she did not bow. She simply stopped, her breath visible in the cold morning air. Between them hung a silence too heavy to be filled with apology. "I come without command," she said at last. Her voice was raw, the strength of authority stripped from it. The fleet has withdrawn. The Imperium will call this world lost. The king's gaze did not waver.
And you?
Will you return to them?
I cannot. Her eyes lowered to the scorched earth between them.
The Emperor teaches that doubt is heresy, yet I have seen your mercy. I have seen what faith without cruelty can be.
I cannot unsee it. Her confession carried no plea, no expectation.
It was simply truth laid bare, fragile and human. The king's reply came after a long silence. You fought for what you were told was light, he said. Now you have seen that light can blind as easily as it guides. Her hands trembled slightly as she unclasped the chain at her neck. From it hung a small icon, a silver aquila, its wings tarnished by smoke. She looked at it one last time before pressing it into his palm. For me, she whispered, faith has become silence. He closed his hand around the token. Then let silence be your prayer. The words did not carry forgiveness, yet they carried peace. Behind her, the soldiers of the Imperium who had survived the battle stood at a distance, watching without orders. Their banners had fallen. Their faith had changed shape. When she turned to leave, they did not follow. They remained where they were, caught between the empire that had abandoned them and the man who had shown them another way. The Inquisitor walked toward the horizon until the storm swallowed her figure. Whether she left to seek redemption or exile, no one knew. The wind erased her footsteps before the next dawn came. The king looked down at the small aquila resting in his hand. The symbol of the empire's god now lay quiet within the grasp of a man who had never prayed to it. He placed it in the earth beside the graves of the fallen, covering it gently with ash. In that act, no triumph was found, only balance. The faith of one world had ended, and something quieter, older, and more honest had begun to take its place. The king turned away from the burial ground. The storm was moving east again. The galaxy waited, and he would follow where mercy demanded. The seasons on Engareth did not change as they did on living worlds. There were no blossoms, no harvests, no rivers that carried memory. Yet time still passed. The ashes cooled, the ground hardened, and from the silence that followed destruction, something began to grow. The survivors of the Panther Legion rebuilt without command. Their strength had never been born from order, but from understanding. They moved like the tide, each wave guided by the pull of purpose rather than decree. The broken machines of the Imperium became homes, their hulls carved into shelter. The wreckage of drop pods became temples where no god was worshipped, only gratitude for the dawn. The king walked among them as one of their own.
No throne had been built for him, no crown forged.
Yet wherever he stood, the air carried a calm that even the restless found peace within. The people began to speak of him not as ruler, but as the keeper, the one who remembered what the galaxy had forgotten. Beyond their horizon, the story of the Panther Legion had already begun to spread again. Traders whispered it between systems, pilgrims carried it in prayer, deserters carried it in guilt. They told of a king who bowed to no god, who fought without hate, who buried his enemies beside his own. In the hive cities of dying worlds, those words became sparks. On manufacturums where slaves worked until their bones broke, the tale became song. The weak began to imagine strength without cruelty. The oppressed began to speak of mercy as weapon. Rebellion, quiet and sacred, was being born, not of rage, but of remembrance. The Imperium, vast and blind, did not yet see it. Its wars burned elsewhere, but in the shadow of its endless banners, hearts began to turn. Among the Astra Militarum, soldiers who had once fought under golden eagles now marked their armor with faint violet lines. In the deep void, ship crews carried hidden medallions shaped not as the aquila, but as the paw of a panther. The legend grew. Some said the king had died and risen again. Others swore he could move between stars unseen, his presence felt in the sudden calm before a battle's end.
None could prove his existence, yet his name was whispered like a secret prayer, T'Challa of the shadowed star. Within the camp, the king felt the shift as well.
The energy around his people changed, hope spreading faster than fear. It was beautiful, but it frightened him. Hope, when worshipped, becomes faith, and faith always hungers for gods. One evening, as the false sun dipped below the ash horizon, he stood upon a ridge and looked down upon the campfire lights below, each one a heartbeat of rebellion. His armor shimmered faintly, the gift of Bast pulsing with quiet restraint. He knew the truth the others could not. Revolutions, no matter how pure, always sought idols, and idols in time became chains. The wind carried his voice, low and weary, toward the sleeping camp. May they remember mercy longer than they remember me. The storm answered in distant thunder, as if the goddess herself had heard and grieved with him. For mercy, once sown, can never be contained. And in a galaxy that worshipped only fire, even the smallest seed of compassion was enough to burn empires. Peace never truly held in the galaxy. It lingered only long enough to remind those who found it how easily it could be lost. Months passed upon Gareth, though time there did not flow as it did elsewhere. The sun burned weaker, the sky dimmed to copper, yet beneath that muted light the Panther Legion endured. The broken learned to live again, and the frightened learned to stand. The ashes of war became the soil of something gentler. But far above, in the sanctums of the Imperium, patience thinned. The reports of unrest reached the golden halls of terror. The High Lords spoke in tones of dread and pride.
A movement without sanction, a legion without chains,
A king without God. Such things could not be allowed to grow. Fleet orders were drawn in silence.
no declaration of war.
No announcement of purge. The Imperium did not strike with fury this time. It would strike with patience. In their creed, faith did not need to rush. Faith only needed to wait for mercy to become rebellion. And so they waited. Ships drifted beyond the edge of sense or range, watching. Agents whispered in the ears of planetary governors, warning them of a heresy wrapped in compassion. Even among the common people, doubt began to bloom, subtle, slow, poisonous. The king who had once saved worlds now became myth, and myths, when they grow too bright, are easy to fear. On Nagarath, the king felt the change before any blade was drawn. The air carried unease. The dreams of his people grew restless. In their sleep, they saw wings of gold turning black. The fires at night no longer warmed. They merely flickered, uncertain of their own light. He stood upon the plateau that overlooked their valley, his gaze fixed on the distant sky. The stars looked unchanged, but their silence had grown heavy. Bast's voice had not come in many nights. Even the gift within his armor pulsed slower, quieter. The Inquisition had not forgotten him. Mercy had not softened them. It had only taught them how to strike differently. The king understood what was coming. Not invasion, not slaughter. A quieter war, one of faith against meaning. A war fought not with weapons, but with doubt. He turned from the horizon and walked through the camp. His people looked up from their work, meeting his gaze, their faces calm but expectant. They trusted him, perhaps too much. Trust, too, was a kind of worship. He stopped before them and spoke, his tone lower than the wind. The war above believes we wait for their fire.
But they forget, patience belongs to kings, not to tyrants. No shout followed. No song was raised.
Yet every soldier who heard him straightened, their resolve hardening in silence. They did not yet know how the war would come. But they knew one truth. When it did, they would not fight to survive. They would fight to remind the stars what mercy looked like when it refused to die. And far above them, in the still dark of the void, the Imperium's fleets held their breath. The war that waited had already begun. The storm came without warning. The heavens tore not with fire, but with light that bled through the cracks of reality itself. The air screamed as the veil between worlds split, spilling raw energy across the sky. The people of Ngarath looked upward in silence, their faces washed in violet and gold. The king stood beneath it, his cloak caught in the wind, his eyes fixed on the rift forming above. It was not the light of the Imperium, nor the fire of chaos. It was something older, deeper, familiar. The same wound that had once carried him across the stars now opened again. The hum of the rift resonated through his armor, awakening the gift of Bast that slumbered within it. The violet glow pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Every breath became heavier, every sound sharper, as if the universe itself had begun to listen once more. Behind him, his people gathered. Fear rippled through the crowd, not of death, but of uncertainty. They had built a home from ruin, only to watch the sky itself threaten to unmake it. The king raised his head toward the rift.
A faint whisper brushed against his mind, the voice of the goddess who had guided him before.
"The balance trembles again, my son." He closed his eyes, and the world slowed. He saw flashes through the light, cities burning in distant systems, ships vanishing into storms, faith collapsing under the weight of its own creation. The war that waited had finally found its reason to awaken. The rift widened. From within, it poured shadows shaped like men, metal and mist intertwined. They fell like rain, each one striking the ground and rising as a creature of the warp, half machine, half hunger. They bore no banners, no symbols, no words. They were the consequence of belief gone mad, souls twisted by centuries of worship that had lost its purpose. The Legion moved instantly. The air filled with the whine of plasma, the hiss of blades meeting armor. The sky burned with the light of 1,000 weapons. But the enemy did not bleed. They dissolved, reformed, multiplied. The rift fed them, birthing horror with every heartbeat. The king stepped into the center of the chaos, the storm wrapping itself around him. He called not to his warriors, but to the silence that had followed Bast's voice. "Show me why I was brought here." The response was not sound, but memory. The energy around him twisted, forming a shape of light and shadow. The figure that emerged bore the faint outline of a panther, vast as the horizon and bright as the heart of a dying star. "Because even gods forget why they fight," the voice said.
And mortals must remind them. The rift roared.
The king's armor blazed with violet light. The Legion rallied behind him. For the first time since his arrival in this galaxy, he felt not lost but placed exactly where he was meant to stand. The fracture in the sky widened still, its brilliance flooding the plains. War had come again, but it did not bring despair this time. It brought purpose. And as the shadows descended, the king's voice carried through the storm, calm and certain. "We fight not for gods nor for thrones. We fight because mercy deserves a place in the stars." The light of the rift spread across the world like dawn turned to judgment. Every color twisted into another, the sky trembling as though unsure of which side of existence it belonged to. The storm that followed was unlike any before it, neither holy nor damned, but something born from the exhaustion of both. From the heart of that broken sky, the faithless poured forth. They were not demons in form, nor men in mind. They were what remained when worship dies, but refuses to be forgotten. Their bodies shimmered like liquid metal, faces blank, movements fluid and unending. Each one carried the echo of a god's discarded prayer. The Panther Legion met them without fear. They fought as one body, their formation woven through years of silence and trust. The air pulsed with light from plasma rifles, the ground shook beneath the rhythm of their charge. But for every faithless that fell, 2 more rose from the fractures of reality. The king stood at the center of it all, his armor radiant, his eyes calm in the storm's fury. Each movement of his blade cut not just flesh or shadow, but belief itself. His strikes ringing like thunder in a world that had forgotten the sound of truth. The air grew thick with sound, not of war, but of lament. The faithless did not scream, they wept. Every step they took toward the living was a plea for meaning, every strike a desperate search for the gods who had abandoned them. Their agony filled the battlefield like the echo of 1,000 dying prayers. The king felt their sorrow in his bones. It was the same sorrow that haunted every empire, the ache of those who had worshipped too long without answer. He moved through them not as executioner but as witness. His blade sang, his strikes clean and measured, but his heart carried grief with every cut. Above the rift flickered, unstable. Its light dimmed and flared, as if uncertain whether to devour or release. The goddess's whisper returned, faint and distant through the roar. Mercy must end what faith cannot. He understood. Calling upon the power gifted by Bast, he drove his claws deep into the ground. The energy within him surged outward in waves, neither light nor shadow, but balance itself. The storm shuddered. The faithless froze where they stood, their forms trembling in the violet glow. Then, one by one, they dissolved into mist, returning to the silence that had first given them shape. The rift screamed as it began to close. The wind howled, tearing at armor and skin alike. The legion fell to their knees, shielding their faces from the blinding brilliance. And when it ended, only quiet remained. The sky above was whole again. The storm had ended, yet no one spoke. The field was littered with the remnants of both battle and prayer, broken weapons, flickering embers, and the faint scent of rain that followed release. The king rose slowly, his armor dimmed but unbroken. His people watched in silence, waiting for him to speak. He looked toward the horizon, where light and shadow still touched, but no longer fought. His voice came soft, steady, and weary. They sought their gods in death. Let us find ours in life, and the wind, gentle now, carried his words beyond the field, across the world, and into the stars that had watched it all in silence. The days that followed were made of silence, an unfamiliar, fragile thing that the survivors feared to disturb. The storm had passed, yet its memory hung heavy in the air. The sky above Angareth was whole again, but its light had changed, softer now, less cruel. The clouds moved like old wounds, healing slow. The Panther Legion rebuilt what had been shattered. The dead were honored, their names whispered rather than shouted. The living worked without command, each hand knowing its task without being told. The world that had once been only ruin now carried rhythm, a pulse like that of a wounded heart learning to beat again. At the edge of the camp, the king sat upon a fragment of black stone, his gaze lost in the horizon's stillness. The gift of Bast within his armor glowed faintly, not in defiance, but in rest. The war had ended, yet he knew wars never truly ended. They merely slept, waiting for mankind's next failure to wake them. The Inquisitor's fleet had not returned. The Imperium's silence was a decision in itself. Perhaps they had seen the futility of fire against compassion, or perhaps they were simply watching from afar, waiting for mercy to fail. The king did not wonder which. Both were truths he had already learned. Children played among the wreckage of ships, their laughter thin but real. Soldiers who had once prayed for death now built shelters and planted small gardens in the dust, coaxing life from a world that had never promised it. Hope, like grass between stone, was growing again. The king watched them quietly. In their movements, he saw echoes of Wakanda, the same balance, the same pride hidden within gentleness. But here, it was stripped of crowns, of lineage, of wealth. Here, humanity stood alone, raw and unadorned, yet beautiful still. When night fell, the camp gathered around the central fire. They spoke not of gods or victory, but of those who had been lost. The king listened, his silence the truest prayer among them. Later, when all had gone to rest, he remained by the dying fire. The ashes glowed faintly, mirroring the quiet light within his armor. He thought of Bast's words, of balance, of remembrance, of the burden that mercy carried. He whispered into the wind, his voice almost gone with the embers. If this peace is the price of pain, then let it hold. Let it live longer than I will. The stars answered not with light, but with stillness. The universe, for once, was quiet enough to listen. And beneath that fragile silence, the king understood that this moment, this calm between storms, was not victory. It was grace, the kind that could not be commanded, only earned through suffering and restraint. In the quiet between wars, mercy had found its breath again, and the galaxy, weary and wounded, dared to breathe with it. And Gareth slept beneath its new sky. The air no longer tasted of ash, but of cold metal and rain. The war scars had softened, half buried beneath the roots of plants that should not have survived. The wind carried no hymns, no orders, only the faint hum of a living world learning to forgive itself. The king stood alone on the plateau above the valley. From that height, he could see the faint lights of his people's shelters scattered across the dark, like stars fallen to the ground. Each one marked a heartbeat that still endured, and that endurance meant more to him than any throne. He closed his eyes. The silence pressed close, not empty, but full, alive with whispers that were not quite voices. They rose from the earth, from the air, from the sky that stretched endlessly above him. For a moment, the boundary between world and soul dissolved. The stars began to speak. Their words were not sound, but memory. He saw flashes across his mind, visions of distant systems, of ships burning, of prayers swallowed by the void. But among those images came something else. People, scattered across the galaxy, whispering his name, not in worship, but in courage. Worlds he had never touched carried his legend as shield. The idea of mercy had learned to walk without him. The voice of Bast came with the wind, soft as breath and deep as eternity. You see now, my son, you were never meant to rule. You were meant to remind. He bowed his head.
Yet they make me symbol, goddess. They make me myth. How do I keep them from building the chains I fled?
Her laughter, distant and sorrowful, trembled through the air. You do not. Every light casts shadow. Every truth becomes story. All you can do is live, and let your living be enough. The king opened his eyes. The stars shimmered, countless and near. Their light touched his armor, and for the first time since his fall through the rift, he felt no separation between himself and the cosmos. He was no longer lost within it. He had become part of its rhythm. Below, the campfires flickered brighter as the people stirred from their rest, sensing the shift in the air. A warmth moved through the valley, subtle, unspoken, like the heartbeat of something greater than survival. The Panther Legion had become more than warriors. They were the echo of a promise that mercy could outlast empires. The king turned away from the stars at last, his eyes calm, his voice little more than a breath. If mercy can be remembered, then I have not failed. The wind carried his words upward until they vanished among the constellations. Somewhere beyond sight, the stars pulsed in quiet reply, as if bowing back to the one who had never demanded worship, only balance. And so the night held. The stars whispered, the world slept, and for the first time in countless ages, the galaxy did not burn. Morning arrived quietly on Nagarath. The horizon shimmered with soft gold, and the world seemed to breathe again after centuries of holding its breath. The storms had faded, the rift sealed, yet the air carried a subtle hum, as though the universe itself remembered what had passed and refused to forget. The king stood at the edge of the valley, the same place where he had first fallen into this world. The ground beneath his feet still bore the faint scorch marks of his arrival. The stars above, once cold and distant, now felt nearer, as if they too had chosen to listen. He did not wear his crown. The armor of Bast shimmered faintly, its glow tempered by peace rather than power. Around him, the people of the Panther Legion moved with purpose, not to prepare for battle, but to rebuild, to live, to create. Children ran between pillars of stone that had once been fortifications, now carved into monuments of remembrance. The Inquisitor returned at last, his vessel descending through calm skies.
No guns were raised.
No words of suspicion followed. When he stepped down, his armor bore new symbols, marks of truce, not of conquest. He approached the king and bowed his head. "The Imperium will honor its word," he said. "Your world is yours. No soldier will trespass again." The king nodded, his eyes steady. "Then may your empire remember what mercy looks like before it forgets again." There was no defiance in his tone, only truth. The Inquisitor said nothing more. He turned and left, his ship rising into the sky like a fading promise. As silence returned, the king looked upward once more. The stars pulsed softly, their light forming faint trails that stretched beyond sight. He could feel the pull of something beyond them, a call not of duty but of destiny. The rift that had brought him here had not been a curse. It had been a summons. Behind him, Bast's voice stirred one last time. "You have given them what gods could not, choice. Your place among them is done. The path ahead is yours to walk, not theirs to follow." He breathed deeply, his heart heavy yet whole. The galaxy did not need a god. It needed memory of kindness, of restraint, of the courage to forgive. The wind swept across the valley as he whispered, "Wakanda forever."
Even among the stars, his armor brightened, light spilling across the horizon.
The air shimmered, bending around him. Then, without sound, the king was gone, drawn once more into the folds of the cosmos, leaving behind a world that had learned how to live, and in the vast dark where war had once ruled, a single trail of violet light drifted onward, a reminder that even in the cruelest universe,
mercy could still find its way home. Centuries passed.
the name T'Challa faded from tongues that once spoke it with reverence, but its echo never vanished. Across the scattered stars of the Imperium, his legend endured, not as worship, but as memory. A whisper in the wind before battle, a prayer spoken by those who refused cruelty. The Panther Legion lived on. They became wanderers, protectors, ghosts who appeared when the innocent were cornered by empires or demons.
No home, no banner, no master, only purpose.
Wherever oppression took root, a shadow followed, and mercy walked beside it. Worlds rebuilt beneath their unseen watch. Children grew up knowing that kindness was not weakness, that courage did not need anger. Even within the Imperium's grand cathedrals, where the Emperor's light was worshipped without question, the faint outline of a panther's paw began to appear on the walls, scratched quietly into the stone by hands too humble to name. The Inquisition tried to erase it. They called it myth, heresy, superstition. But myths have always been the last refuge of truth, and, somewhere beyond the reach of fleets and faith, within the quiet between galaxies, the rift pulsed again. Not as storm this time, but as memory made light. For balance never ends, it only moves from one keeper to the next. The goddess Bast watched in silence, her eyes soft with pride.
"He has done what even gods cannot," she whispered to the void.
"He made mercy eternal." The stars answered in silence, their glow spreading across the dark. And from that endless sea of night, the faintest glimmer of violet light drifted still, never fading, never forgotten. The legend of the Black Panther had crossed universes, defied gods, and outlasted war. Not as ruler,
Not as savior.
but as proof that even in the age of eternal darkness, the heart of a king could still teach the stars how to be kind. In the endless quiet of space, where stars are born and die without witness, the story of the Black Panther lingered, not as echo but as rhythm. It moved between constellations, threading through time like breath through lungs. The galaxy changed. Empires fell, faiths rose, and even gods forgot their own names. Yet still, somewhere beneath it all, balance endured.
On worlds rebuilt from ruin, children spoke of a shadow that walked beside heroes.
In battle hymns, soldiers whispered of a king who fought not for conquest, but for calm. His face was no longer known, his name lost to the archives of men, but his spirit had become law, an unseen gravity pulling the universe back toward mercy. The Imperium called it coincidence. The ecclesiarchy called it blasphemy. The few who understood simply called it truth. And in a place beyond the reach of light, where the veil between life and legend thinned, a figure walked a path of silver sand. His stride was neither hurried nor weary. His armor shimmered faintly, carrying the memory of battles fought and forgiven. Before him, two shapes waited, one cloaked in shadow, the other bathed in light. Bast stood between them, eyes bright as the first dawn. "You walked among the cruel and taught them patience," she said. "You gave peace to the weary and power to the forgotten. What do you seek now?" The king bowed his head, only to rest when no one must bleed for what they believe. Her gaze softened. "Then rest, my son. But know this, mercy is never still. It moves with those who remember." He smiled faintly. "Then let it move forever." The wind rose, carrying his voice across the veil. The stars pulsed once more, brighter than before, as if acknowledging the promise made beneath their gaze. And so the legend of the Black Panther passed beyond even myth, becoming not story, not godhood, but balance itself. Whenever the strong forgot gentleness, or the weak forgot courage, the universe remembered him. Not in temples or songs, but in the stillness after battle, when even gods grew quiet enough to listen, for some legends do not end. They become the silence that teaches the stars to breathe again. 1,000 years later, beneath the light of a dying sun, a ship drifted between fractured moons. Its hull was old, its engines quiet, but its symbol, etched in faded silver, still gleamed faintly. The mark of the panther. Inside, no crew remained.
Only echoes, only silence.
The last record played on loop, its voice soft and steady, like a heartbeat long remembered. "If you are hearing this, then you walk the road I once walked. Know this, Strength without kindness is emptiness, and peace without struggle is illusion. The galaxy will always burn, but between the flames there will always be someone who chooses to build instead of destroy. Outside the star shuddered, its light bending toward collapse. Yet, within that fading light, something stirred. A pulse of violet, faint but resolute. It was not a signal. It was not a soul. It was remembrance. Planets turned, empires crumbled, gods fell silent. Still, in the heart of the void, the roar of the Black Panther lingered, not of rage, but of defiance against despair. And when the next age began, when new worlds rose from dust and life found courage once more, the first sound heard was not thunder nor the hum of machines. It was the faint echo of that roar, traveling still through space and time, reminding creation that mercy was never weakness, and that even kings can bleed for love. Thus ended the legend of T'Challa in the galaxy of endless war.
Not as conqueror, not as savior,
but as the quiet between the storms, the last roar of the panther carried forever by the stars. When the roar faded, silence returned, not as emptiness but as peace finally earned. The universe drifted onward, its wounds closing with time's slow mercy. The stars that had watched the wars of gods and kings began to shine softer, as though tired of rage and ready to remember light. On one distant world, life stirred again. The soil was dark and fertile, rich with the ashes of forgotten battles. From that soil a small sprout broke through, reaching for the light of twin suns. Its leaves shimmered faintly, green with veins of deep violet. The color of memory, the color of balance, generations past. The people who would one day rise upon that world knew nothing of T'Challa, nor Wakanda, nor the galaxy that had once trembled beneath his shadow. Yet in their hearts the same truth slept, an instinct to protect, to preserve, to stand where others fall. They called it the spirit of the panther. Not a god, not a myth, just a whisper in their blood that urged them to act when cruelty returned. And when night came, their children looked to the stars and swore they saw a shape among them, faint, graceful, eternal. A silhouette crouched beneath the constellations, watching, waiting, guarding. Bast's voice, soft as starlight, drifted across the ages. Even in the death of galaxies, my son's heart beats still. So long as one life chooses mercy over power, the panther walks with them. The suns rose higher, and the wind moved gently across the new world. The air carried no scent of war, only the promise of life renewed. And somewhere beyond time's reach, in the stillness between creation and oblivion, a figure stood once more beneath a quiet sky, no crown, no throne, no burden, only the peace he had fought to make real. The king who had defied gods smiled softly, his eyes calm and endless. The dawn had come again, not just for one world, but for all that had forgotten how to hope. And the stars, as they always had, bowed their light to the one who had taught them how. The stars turned once more, slow and patient, as they always had. Eons passed without number, and the galaxies that had burned in fury were now whispers of dust drifting through silence. Yet in that silence, something still moved, soft as breath, steady as a heartbeat. It was not a sound. It was a memory. The memory of a king who had walked among gods and monsters and chosen mercy instead of dominion. The universe, vast and unfeeling, still carried his lesson in the rhythm of its light. On a forgotten world, where the wind carved new shapes into ancient stone, A single panther's paw print glimmered faintly in the dust. The people who walked there did not know his name, but when they looked upon that mark, their hearts felt lighter, steadier, braver. They did not pray, they simply remembered, and so across the infinite stretch of time, the balance held, not through power, not through fear, but through the quiet understanding left behind by one who had learned that mercy could outlast any war. Far beyond the reach of suns, where creation folds into itself and begins again,
a voice echoed through the void, calm, eternal, resolute.
The heart of a king beats not for his crown, but for the world that learns to breathe because he lived. The light dimmed, the circle closed, and in that final stillness the universe exhaled, peaceful at last.